Hi all. Thank you, geeks, for that wonderful introduction. I'm Janak, and I'll be talking to you about the latest and upcoming OAuth specifications and what problems they help solve. So let's take a little trip back in time. So there was a time in the internet where when you need to connect services, service A would ask for your password of service B. Sounds a little risky, right? And this was a common pattern back then. So, how can systems talk to each other without sharing passwords? This is exactly what OAuth solves with access delegation. So let's take a look at how exactly OAuth does this. So say now you are a user of Twitter, and then Twitter has this capability to connect to your Google contacts. Now there's a user who's already logged into Twitter, and the user finds this find friends capability and clicks on it. Now, right now, Twitter will not ask you for your username and password of Google. Instead, the user will be redirected to the Google's authorization server. What happens is Twitter is now creating an authorization request to Google. And when you do this authorization request, you need to say for what you are requesting this authorization for. So OAuth has this concept called scopes. And scopes are used to denote what these authorizations are. So in this case, it can be a scope like access contacts. So in turn, what Google is going to do is prompt you and ask, is it okay to give access to your Google contacts to Twitter? And when the user grants access, Google's authorization server is going to return something called an access token to Twitter. And this access token contains the user's authorization. And now Twitter can access Gmail and get the user's contacts. So this is the basics of OAuth. And this is how OAuth solves the credential sharing issue via access delegation. So OAuth 2.0 was introduced back in 2012. So that's over 13 years ago. Since then, there have been several challenges in the internet for security and user experience. And OAuth has gotten several extensions that will help solve these problems. I would, of course, love to talk to you about all of these extension standards, but in the interest of time, I have selected few of these standards, and we'll go through what problems they help solve. Let's dive in. Let's take an example. When you're logging into, say, a banking application, what happens is the banking application will call to the bank application's authorization server to authenticate the user. But how this actually happens with OAuth is you'd use a HTTP GET request, and you'd send the request details in query parameters. Now, of course, this request details can contain sensitive information as well. Of course, you have TLS, and it protects the integrity and confidentiality of your message until it goes to the authorization server. So, but in actuality, before it hits your authorization server, you'd have, small technical difficulty. Okay, so before it hits your authorization server, you'd have different components like a web application firewall or a load balancer or few others in your deployment. And TLS is terminated at that point. And the rest of the flow, it could be unsecured transit. Of course, you can reestablish TLS, but in these points, TLS will be terminated. And now, what if you have any untrusted components or components that is not in your control in these places? The authorization request can be tampered with. And not only that, now, from the browser to the web application firewall, the load balancer, and your application server, you would have access logs. And this sensitive information can get logged along the way. And if you have something like PII information, it's going to be a nightmare to clean up. So how can we solve this? How can we enhance this flow? There are two specifications that you can use: the JWT Secured Authorization Request and the Pushed Authorization Request. So let's see how this works. So when using the JWT Secured Authorization Request, instead of sending all these details in the query parameters, you can encapsulate it in a JWT, and that JWT will be signed and optionally encrypted as well. So now, even though TLS is terminated, there's no problem because you have security at the application layer. But still, this JWT will get logged along the way. So how can we solve that? This is where push authorization request comes in. So push authorization request introduce a new endpoint where you can push these details to the authorization server beforehand. And what it does is, in return, it sends you something called a request reference. And this request reference can be used in your actual authorization request. Now there's nothing to be logged anymore. So the overall flow is secure. And this request reference is one-time use, and it has its own expiry time. Let's move on to another scenario. Now, I talked about access tokens. So these access tokens are generally known as bearer tokens. What it means is whoever's holding the access token can access these resources. So it's like cash. So if I go to a merchant and do some payment with cash, the merchant doesn't know whether the cash belonged to me or I just picked it up from the flow. So same thing applies to access tokens because they are bearer tokens at the moment. So what if an attacker manages to steal these access tokens and then uses this to access the resources? So how can you protect this flow? So the solution, there are like a couple of standards that you can use for this. One is mutual TLS client authentication and certificate bound access tokens. The other one is demonstrating proof of possession. So let's take a look at how these two work. So at a very high level, both of these work in the same manner. When the banking application sends the access token request, now along with the access token request, you're going to send something called a proof of possession. What this essentially says is that the banking application will be having some kind of a private key, and it's going to prove to the authorization server that is in hold of it, that it has the possession of that private key. And then when the authorization server returns back the access token, now the authorization server is going to bind the access token to this proof. And in turn, when the banking application goes and talks to the resource server, now the resource server knows that the request should accompany, along with the access token, a proof of possession as well. If that is not there, the request will be rejected. So say now attacker steals the access tokens again, but now these cannot be used because the attacker is not in possession of this proof. So the entire flow is now more enhanced. So you can think about bound access tokens like a debit card with a PIN. You need both to use it. Let's move on to another scenario. Let's take a scenario where a customer is doing a banking transaction via a phone. So how this normally happens is when the bank customer care agent gets the call, the customer care agent would ask some security questions to verify that this is the actual user that is doing the transaction. But now with all these advanced phishing techniques, and especially with AI-enhanced phishing techniques, we could already assume that these answers to these questions could be already known. So how can we incorporate more strong authentication into such a flow? The answer comes from an OpenID Foundation specification called Client-Initiated Backchannel Authentication Flow. So what happens now is, instead of the banking customer care agent asking for security questions, he or she can initiate an authentication request to the authorization server, which in turn, the authorization server would use a different channel and call the customer themselves and then ask to verify. So at this point, the customer can authenticate, and then you could even incorporate MFA into this flow, and then with a higher assurance level, you can perform this transaction. Moving on, let's take another flow. So now I go to a vendor, I collect some goods, and now I go to the POS system to make a payment. And now the POS system has integrated with the bank, and I can do the payment directly via the bank. So how can we authenticate and authorize such a flow? So we can actually use the same flow that we discussed in the previous slide, the client-initiated backchannel authentication. But now there's another problem here. So like I mentioned before, OAuth uses scopes to denote the authorization that is required. So in this case, it can be something like perform payment. But for how much? So if a POS system becomes malicious, instead of charging 100 rupees, it could end up charging 100,000 rupees. So how can you restrict or do fine-grained authorization? So Then taking a step back, there's an inherent problem of scopes where it is only meant for coarse-grained authorization. So the solution comes from OAuth 2.0's Rich Authorization Requests. So where you can create a more fine-grained authorization request with something called authorization detail. Like you see in the screen, authorization detail can contain a type, like say payment initiation. Then you can have the currency, the amount, the creditor likewise. And now when the user does this authorization and the transaction is done, it's a very restricted transaction and it cannot be misused. Moving on, so let's go to another scenario where a customer has already logged into the banking application with username and password. So now, say the customer would want to view the account details. Okay, fine, username and password is enough for this. But what if you want to do fund transfer as well? So is username and password authentication giving enough assurance that this is in fact the exact user? So you generally want a higher assurance level for tasks like this. So the banking system will reject it, saying you need an additional OTP as well to have higher assurance to perform this transaction. So how can we do this in a standard flow? So you can use the OAuth 2.0 Step-Up Challenge Authentication protocol to do this, where when the banking resource server receives this request, it will reject the request and communicate, I need this sort of assurance. And then the banking application in turn can initiate another authorization request to the authorization server, and the authorization server will prompt the user for this additional option. So afterwards, you can do the overall flow with a higher assurance level. So let's move on to another scenario. Sometime back, if you would log into a smart TV application, you would need to type in your username and password with your remote, right? And if you have a complex password and going through this QWERTY keyboard using the remote, it's going to be a very tedious task. So the OAuth community understood this and understood the need for a more seamless way to do this authentication. So this is where the Device Authorization Grant comes in. So nowadays, if you try to log into a smart TV application, it's more likely to show you a QR code where the user can use another device, scan the QR code, go into that, using the QR code, it goes to the authentication screen and then perform the authentication. And even MFA is possible more seamlessly. So what about browserless devices or devices that doesn't have input at all? You can still use this device authorization grant. The only requirement is this device authorization grant has something called a user code. That is the only dynamic part of this. So you can, if you have a way to transmit this to the user's device, be it by displaying NFC, Bluetooth low energy, advertising, anything, if you can transmit it to the user's device, the user can easily authenticate using another device. Another thing is, if you have logged into native applications, especially in iOS devices, what it happens is when you try to perform this flow, you need to open up a browser. And then even in iOS, what happens is it will prompt a consent screen asking the users, okay, do you want to go to this page first? And then the browser pops up, then you have to enter your credentials, and then you go back to the application. So for a native application, this seems a little bit of a disconnected flow. So how can you solve this? Of course, you can use the password grant, but then it's only password-based authentication. What if you need to incorporate MFA right now? So you're going to fall into trouble. So again, the OAuth community has identified the need for this, and there's an early draft right now called OAuth 2.0 for first-party applications. So we ourselves have implemented a version of this draft, and there's a screen that you're seeing which has a more integrated experience when you do the login. Now this is happening inside the application itself without a browser. So moving on, so let's talk a little bit about different type of standards. So there's this set of documents called best current practice documents or BCPs. So these BCPs tells you how to use OAuth in different contexts. like how to use OAuth better in native applications, in browser-based applications, likewise. One important thing to note when going through BCPs is when they were published. So for example, OAuth 2.0 for native applications was published in 2017. And if you take the technology landscape of native applications, it has evolved a lot from 2017 to now. So the recommendations that were given at that time either can be not sufficient right now or even redundant in some cases. So when you're going through BCPs, the context matters a lot. So think a lot about the context. So a very good example is this JSON Web Token Best Current Practices document. It was released in 2020, but now there are discussions in the community that there should be a revision of this specification with more up-to-date recommendations. Moving on, you all might have heard about OAuth 2.1. So what is OAuth 2.1? Like I mentioned in the beginning, OAuth 2.0 was published in 2012. That is over 13 years ago. Since then, security needs have evolved and additional standards have emerged. So OAuth 2.1 has nothing new. It's just a streamlined update for OAuth 2.0 with best current practices, and then it is also removing some redundant flows, like the password grant. So when I was going through these scenarios, I didn't touch upon any agentic cases. So you all might be wondering why. So it's still at early stage discussion in communities, and we are also part of these discussions. There are some standards that are available today that will help bridge the gaps that AI agentic use cases that are needed. But there are several gaps that requires new specifications. So if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you attend the next session that is done by Ayesha Disanayake, where she will talk about how to secure your AI with IAM for agents. So we have been talking about standards. So why do standards matter actually? Very first thing is interoperability. So standards enable independent systems to communicate using a common protocol. So imagine if every vendor had their own standard of doing things, there will be a lot of implementations for the client, and it's going to be a mess. The other thing is, these are shared protocols and not proprietary APIs, which means no vendor lock-in. Okay, if you are doing some sort of in-house development, interoperability or vendor lock-in might not matter that much for you. But still, if you have a problem that is already solved by an open standard, I highly recommend you that you use that open standard, because these are rigorously reviewed by identity experts and battle tested. At WSO2, we have identified the need for these standards, and we have actively adopted them to enhance security and user experience. And we will keep on adopting these standards to make more enhancement to ensure that we are at the forefront of modern identity standards. Thank you all. That brings an end to my session.